Welcome to the Working World. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham.
Jamie, we just had Tanya Mariottini, the director from Global Mobility at Twilio in the US. Wow, what a session.
I tell you what, Karen, you know, we spoke about ESG, which I'll get you to get into. But it's funny, it's one of those things that I didn't realise has grown so much and so quickly, and particularly in the US.
Sure. So I guess for those who aren't familiar with the acronym, it's environmental, social and governance. And I guess, Jamie, you're right. It's taken a back step in the last few years, obviously with the pandemic and various other social impacts. ESG, certainly in the US, and we're seeing it start to creep into APAC and EMEA as well as a focus area for HR and mobility, is certainly gaining traction and fast as well, not only at a corporate level, but also at a vendor level as well. And Tanya goes into how that, I guess, those relationships interlinked and what everybody can do and play a role in that space to really focus on and align with some of the UN goals.
And I think Tanya's a really great get for the working world, you know, like, I mean, to have her level of knowledge and experience, fantastic. Yeah, really looking forward to sharing this one.
Yeah, she's absolutely a very well-respected mobility practitioner globally. She does lots of work outside of Twilio in a social responsibility sector, and she gives a lot back to the community as well. So a real treat for everybody to watch. So enjoy, guys. Hi, Tanya. How are you? Lovely to see you. Welcome to the Working World.
Karen, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm doing great.
It's all our pleasure. Now, Tanya, today we're going to talk about ESG, but I thought we might start with having you explain for our audience here in Australia and probably the rest of the world what ESG is, please.
Absolutely. And, you know, because we all needed one more acronym in our lives. So yeah, ESG, it's really 3 pillars of sustainability. And a lot of companies are focused on it right now. The E stands for environmental, and it's really the impact on the planet. The S stands for social, and it's really the relationships with employees, customers, your community. And the G stands for governance, and it's around corporate leadership standards.
Excellent.
So can you just, Tanya, just to give us a bit more of an explanation as far as like digging deeper into each of those things, you know, just as Karen said, it's emerging in America. I'd imagine that, you know, it's going to be catching on to the rest of the world pretty quickly. And I suppose from my point of view, I just wonder how global mobility professionals can start to embrace this.
No, it's great. Yeah. And I think it shows up in a lot of ways. And for a lot of companies, and I think global companies are starting to come out and they're talking about their carbon reduction goals or their carbon offset goals. So as we think about the E, the environmental piece, carbon's a big piece. And if you think specifically about our industry, obviously air travel, household goods shipments, like what are we doing in that space to be more sustainable? On the social side, a lot of it is about community, giving back, doing right by your communities, and a lot of companies. And I would say, I even think of some of the things that I'm involved in, like Move for Hunger. It's a little bit like, how do we make our communities a better place? And how are we giving back and being involved? And then the governance piece, maybe on the mobility isn't so much, but governance is really around the ethics, a little bit on the DE&I and how companies operate. So I think as you understand what your corporation's goals are kind of broadly, then there's a way to weave that in. And I would say, like, I work for Twilio today. Twilio is very focused. We're a communication engagement platform, and we're very focused on the social aspect. So we've really done a lot in the social space. And so when I think about my program, I also think about, okay, what are we doing broadly as a company? And what are some of the ways that we can contribute broadly to the ESG goal?
So, sorry, just a quick one,
sure.
You know, extending on this. So this, in my mind, has been sort of bubbling under the surface for a while, right? Like this doesn't feel brand new to me. But what has suddenly changed that now it is actually the rubber's hitting the road and things are moving in this direction?
So I think this is such a great question. I think what we're really seeing is shifting expectations from employees and also consumers, right? So if I'm an employee, it's so important as I'm thinking about where I'm going to work for next, like, do the values of the company align with my values? Do they care about the environment? Like, what are they doing? Are they giving back to their communities? Are they an ethical company in the way that they operate? So I think employees are demanding it. But I would also say that I think a lot of companies are seeing their shareholders, their board, like there's different questions. So I think it's always been important. I'm sure as many of us experience, there's a lot of different climate things happening around the world that have been very impactful. And I think it's front of mind for a lot of people. And from I'll just say my perspective, all of us during COVID really had the opportunity to reflect on what was important to us. And I think so many of employees and individuals have just taken a different view on it. So I agree with you. Like, this is something that's been around for a really long time, but why is it all of a sudden in the limelight and the spotlight? And I think it's just that, frankly, just more people care, and they're demanding it. Employees are demanding it of their employers, and shareholders are demanding it of the companies that they're investing in.
Wow.
I guess, that kind of gives us a bit of a background as to why at an individual level and even a company level, why ESG is becoming more important. But why, can you tell us a little bit why it's important, I guess, to mobility? Because a big cohort of our audience watching this are mobility practitioners and HR providers. So could you talk a little bit to that?
I can. So a high level and then talk to some specifics, but really it's a huge talent attraction and retention. And as we think about our mobility programs, we're always thinking about like how do we create the right policy, craft the right policy? And this is part of it. And I know I talked about the company culture, but I think there are things that you can do in your program as well to be sustainably minded as far as the benefits that you have. And I'll give a few examples, obviously, and you may have heard of like different discard and donate programs. Like, how do you help reduce the shipment size? How do you use reusable materials in the shipment? So how do you give employees the option for more flexible choices? Like, instead of a household goods shipment, you give them a furniture allowance. So I think there are things that we can think of broadly that we can craft into our program that, again, are really part of that broader attraction and retention as employees come in. Because, for mobility, it's one of the very first interactions they have. And as a company, if we're saying like, these are our values, ESG is really important to us, and then you interact with the mobility program and you're like, well, gosh, this doesn't really feel like they're saying they do all these things, but the program doesn't really reflect that as far as they've been thoughtful about the impact on the environment. Again, it's the first view they have of the company, and you want to make sure that you're reinforcing what that message is.
Yeah. And for global mobility practitioners who haven't come across this yet, and I've got to be honest, from my point of view, I'm like, what's ESG? It's just another TLA, right? Like a 3-letter acronym. I'm like, come on, I've got it. And as you said, we've got enough of them in our life. And so as a mobility practitioner, would I start to build a manual? Would I start to, how would I approach this? Where would I start?
So I think that it's, again, best to start with kind of overarching, like, what are the most important things for your company? What is your company already focused on? Like, are they looking at carbon? Are they tracking your carbon? Maybe they're tracking your water utilization. And I would say like different industry segments as well, like the impact that they have on the environment is very different. So I'd start with that. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, and I've done it, if your company, we have a chief social impact officer. We also have a chief diversity officer. They're very involved with these pillars. Reach out to the teams, like talk to them and say, hey, help them. I always feel like mobility, one of the biggest things we do is we're always educating everybody what our function actually does, but like educate them about your function and what you do, and then figure out from them, what are their focus areas? What are some of their goals? And how can you navigate some of those things? And then I really do think looking at your policy, and another specific, Jamie, that I would give to, which I heard another company was doing and I loved it, is that as they looked at their policy and they thought about different benefits, they actually made little icons and like a little, like a little earth with a heart, like this one is earth friendly, or this one is good for like your family well-being, if it's like spousal support, and different things to really kind of like, these are the things that are important to us as a company. We've realigned that with leaders, and then we've kind of built it into our policy and framework. And like, again, I love the icon idea because I'm such a visual person, right? Like, you can see visually, like, I really care about the environment, and I'm going to make some of these selections because I know that they're environmentally friendly, or I really want to have a social impact. And I know that by selecting these things, like, I'm helping support different, diverse supplier base or different communities. The ones
you want, like planet.
Yeah. And also the benefits that you need to move, but like, you're an informed consumer. So, and it's little things like that. But again, if you don't know where to start, see if you have broader goals, talk to your internal team, and then kind of try to see where can you start to align your policy and program towards that.
Yeah, great.
And Tanya, you mentioned, some specifics around, ways you can tweak your policy. And I think one of the ones you mentioned was around, working with your providers to, either do, recycling of boxes or give allowances instead of shipping, those sort of things. Have you, obviously all those behaviours at a corporate or organisational level will eventually feed down to drive support system behaviour, being that the vendors. Have you seen any providers on your side adopt any changes yet?
And that's such a great question. And I'm going to back it up a little bit too and just share with you. So I think it's really important when you're selecting a supplier partner that you're including questions. And I know from talking to our internal ESG team that they want to have standard questions across all of procurement, that our procurement team is going to start, that our procurement team is going to start holding responsible different suppliers throughout the supply chain. And so I do think it's important asking those questions up front and trying to understand what suppliers are already doing in these spaces, and then working, if you work with a relocation management company, what are their household goods shipping companies doing, or what are their corporate housing providers doing? And there are a lot of things in this space too, where it's like, hey, we care about the environment individually as like an RMC. These are the things that we're doing. I've heard examples of like, we've installed lights that automatically shut off in the office. We've built green buildings. We've got, for our company vehicles, we're moving to electric vehicles. Like there's so many things. And so we have an annual report, a lot of companies do, of kind of our impact. And there's a lot of great ideas out there about all of the different things, again, you can do for your office, for your employees, to really understand what that footprint is.
You mentioned earlier before about different jobs, and I think there was a chief sustainability officer and obviously a diversity officer. So as a sort of, from a business owner point of view, or from the finance or accountant's point of view, it doesn't seem to be, the old saying used to be there's the earners and there's the burners, right? Like as far as your business goes. But these sort of, I suppose they could be seen as that sort of feel-good type roles. How do you communicate to a business owner or to a business that these roles are actually valuable and are going to contribute to the bottom line?
That's so interesting. So,
Yeah.
And I don't know how to say this, because some of it may be, when I think of like what's important to me, and as I'm thinking about what employer I want to work on, like that's intrinsically a value. Yeah. And I think that there are, again, back to the talent attraction, that who we are as a company, as a customer is, and that's why I'm having a hard time, Jamie, answering like, that's intrinsic, like that's intangible. Like, how do I come up with a value?
Funny, like I get it, right? Like, and you
get,
and a lot of us sort of know it, right? Like, it's like, we just know that's the right thing to do. But as I said, I'm sure there's these business owners going over this airy-fairy, so like, oh, it's just another fad, or it's just this. I think that, I think probably to your point, it's like you want to work there when you feel good, you're more productive, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think, again, back to the attraction and retention, like you can attract the best talent want to stay, because not only do they get to have a really cool job, like I have a really cool job in mobility, but I work for a company that has the same values.
They're proud of that.
And is giving back to their community. And the one thing that I always like to share is that our CEO, Jeff Lawson, our impact report opens with a statement that our goal as a company is to make the world a little bit better than we found it.
Yeah.
Perfect. It has nothing to do with the actual like product that we deliver. Like businesses exist. And he said this on multiple platforms, like businesses exist to give back to their communities and to make the world better than they found it, just a little bit better, like incrementally better. And so like we fundamentally believe that as a company. And so I think, again, that's why I'm struggling a little bit with the question. Like, I don't think anyone's even thought about like, how do we measure it? I mean, obviously there's things that we're doing to give back to our communities, and there's things that we're measuring around like tactical things that we're putting in place with procurement to make sure that we're actually, if we say we're going to do this, like that we're holding ourselves accountable to it. But it's not about like a profit line, like a bottom dollar type thing. I think we think it pays dividends, but you may not be able to
You sort of just know, right? Like you know it's good, you know what's happening, you know it's going to be better. But as I said, I'm sure there's those people out there who just look at it, the black and white numbers, right?
Well, and it's an interesting conversation too, because I would argue, happy to argue with anyone, you might argue with me, Jamie, is that companies that don't do this at some point are going to be left out because their customers are going to expect it of them. So whether you do it because it's the right thing to do, or you do it because you have to do it because you just got an RFP from me and I'm asking you questions. So you better have a good answer, because if you don't, guess what? I'm not going to select you, and Karen's not going to select you, and Jamie's not going to select you. So I think they're going to be forced to do it one way or another. But I think the companies that are on the leading edge that are like, hey, and it may cost a little bit more upfront because we don't have, electric cars are still really expensive as an example, or, some of the other building materials, it may cost a little bit more upfront, but I think in the long run, it's I'm like, it's going to keep you in business. I think it's just where we're headed.
Yeah.
Investment that needs to be made. Speaking of leading edge company, obviously Twilio is at the forefront of that cohort, and I wondered whether you'd be able to share with us some of the aspects that you guys are focusing on as a company or as a mobility function in Twilio in relation to ESG, of course.
Yeah, no, and I'll talk a little broadly. I'd really encourage everybody. Again, we have a DEI and social impact report that we've released, 56 amazing pages of information, but it'll give you a lot of ideas. It goes into a lot of detail. And again, we're very focused on the social. One of the things that I'm most proud of is we have what it's called, We Pledge 1%. And we encourage our employees to pledge 1% of their time or their money. It could be equity, it could be pay, it could just be taking time off to support different volunteer organizations. So I'm always really proud to share that. On the social side as well, we pledged millions of dollars to help support vaccine equity. But the social piece is really important to us. On the environmental side, we have, for the last couple of years, we've reported in transparency our carbon footprint. And we have committed this year, I think imminently, but the latter half of this year, we're going to announce our science-based goal for carbon reduction. So, and many companies in the US and globally have started to announce those over the last few years and how they're going to reduce their carbon or do some kind of carbon offset. So that's a focus for us as a company. And then governance, again, is just transparency and ethics on how we operate. And as you think about, again, we have a chief diversity officer. We've announced that we're an anti-racist company, and we've done a lot of work, I want to say, across the company as education, but also in the communities to give back. So kind of those are some big things I broadly think of. Twilio.org is our social arm, and we've really overamped on the social. There's a lot that's going on in the space, and that makes my heart really happy. And then within our program, we have specifically, we've implemented a discard and donate program, which again, reduces the actual shipment. It costs the company less. So there's to your bottom line. Do a discard and donate, has less carbon impact, and it costs the company less. And it's a great experience for the employees, because instead of shipping all their stuff, they actually figure out what they want to ship. And then they dispose of the other items in an environmentally friendly way. The other thing that I mentioned or just touched on is Move for Hunger. Move for Hunger takes the food, and it's only available in the US in a few locations, but stay tuned for global.
We can open Australia, don't worry, we're here.
I know. Karen and I have already been strategizing, so stay tuned on that. Yeah. But Move for Hunger, when you move, you throw out food. Food is actually one of the largest contributors to methane gas, and methane gas is actually a lot worse for the environment than carbon, I think by a factor of 3. So it's a great way to just, easily hey, to give this to a mover, to the corporate housing provider, to whoever, and have that go back to a community in need. So those are a few of the things that we've done. The idea I shared with you about the icons in the policy, stay tuned. I just heard about that in the last month, and I was like, brilliant. Yeah. Love it. We need to do something in our program, because I really do. I want our consumers, our employees, to be informed about the decisions that they're making. So those are a few of the things. And then the other, we have had a few recent RFPs. We have included questions specifically around ESG to find out what companies are doing, what they're already measuring, how they hold themselves accountable. So I think those are the big things that we have done so far. But I would say, you're all saying hey, I've never heard of ESG before. we're just starting as well. Like we're just starting the journey. And I think it's becoming more and more important to our corporations. And we're, again, figuring out like, how do we incorporate this into what we do in global mobility?
It sounds amazing. I mean, it also sounds like you guys invest a lot of time, effort, energy, and money into this. So when we're talking to smaller organizations, right? Like, you know, you sit there thinking, I'd love to do that, I'd love to do this, but, you know, I'm sort of trying to manage everything else that's going on. Where do smaller companies go? Is there like a forum that people can join? How do they find out these ideas? How do they share the ideas? Because to your point, you know, the whole thing with the icons is awesome. And I think that how do we speed up that information exchange, you know, and these ideas?
Yeah. So one is listening to the Working World podcast.
Hey, now
share
you're
great
talking.
ideas. Yeah. But the other, kind of your foundational, and something that that we actually reference back to, and some of my industry colleagues have as well, is that the United Nations has, because you want another acronym, SDGs,
yeah.
Sustainable Development Goals. And so they have a whole list. There's 17 different sustainable development goals that they have come up with. And then underneath that, they've got how they intertwine, they've got different ideas, and there's other resources. So I would say, like, if you're looking for it, there are resources out there. And I'm one of those big believers, like we all just need to do our part. Like it just takes one. So I do,
totally.
You know, maybe you're a smaller company, and you're hearing me say some of these things and you're like, gosh, like we can't do all of those things. But even I was talking to a household good moving company earlier in the week, and they were like, hey, you know what, we can't do our whole fleet in electric trucks, but we just bought our first electric truck, like one, right? Like we're starting, or
it's the first step.
Like it's a first step, or like, hey, we know we need to, you know, rethink packaging materials. And we haven't quite figured that out, but like we're talking about it, right? Like we're having the conversation. And I think that's it. I think it's a snowball effect, right? Like it'll take a little bit up front, but once you actually get started and you talk to other people about it. So I'm always like, that's how I feel in mobility. Like we don't have everything figured out, but we're taking these small steps, and like our small steps. And if you take small steps, that will all add up and hopefully have a significant impact.
Yeah. Speaking, I guess, of small steps, you know, if we've got people watching this who, you know, this hasn't been on their radar, you know, admittedly, because the last 2 years or 3 years has been consumed by the pandemic, you know, and they're just looking at this ESG subject for the first time, you know, what would, I guess, if you could pick 3 things, the top 3 things that mobility leaders could do to, I guess, tweak or take those first steps in their programs, what would that be in your eyes?
Yeah, so I think the first would be, and again, small program, you may not have it, but if there's somebody internal to your company that you can talk to and just understand about the company's goals, I think that would be a great first step. Because again, whatever you do, you know, if there's one specific area, or there may already be some infrastructure, like that would be the one to focus on. The other, I really do think looking at your policy, like are there a few things that you could easily change or make adjustments to? Again, you mentioned earlier, Karen, like the cash allowance in lieu of a household goods shipment. Like there might just be a few things that would be easy to add in, just like as a starting point. So again, talk to someone internally, look at your policy. And then the other is probably maybe educate yourself, talk with other folks in your network. The other great resource I should probably mention is that the Worldwide ERC has just started an ESG committee, and they have just kicked that off recently. There's several members across our industry who are participating in it. I know that they post regular articles and share other information. So I'd say, like, just get yourself involved in the dialogue in our community and learn from others. That's how I learned about the cool little icon that I was just so excited about. It's something silly, but I think something that could be impactful, especially on a broader scale. So yeah, so talk internally, look at your policy, and then maybe just get involved with your community and educate yourself and see what ideas might work for your program.
Great.
I sort of feel like you need to have an ESG champion, right? Like you find your person who loves this stuff and is driven. And, you know, there's lots of people out there and in your team, I'm sure, who could become the ESG champion. And so I think that to your point, you know, the educate yourself struck me as the first thing to do, like immerse yourself into this whole thing. And I really liked the idea you had about holding your suppliers accountable to this, because I think that, as you said, it blossoms pretty quickly, right? Like as a result of this podcast today, I go, right, well, what I'm going to do is one of my action points will be just to put it as a question when I'm selecting vendors. And then the vendor goes, hey, I didn't know about this. And all of a sudden they're educating themselves like, oh, that's a good idea. I want to, so it really does feel like this thing is gaining momentum pretty quickly.
I agree. That's what I hope. And I was going to say, if you need an ESG champion, I raise my hand, feel free to, I would say anyone listening to the podcast, feel free to reach out to me for other ideas. I'm happy to share the information that I do have, or share the resources, or connect you with other individuals, like-minded individuals in our industry that would be happy. And I will say too, Jamie, to your point, the suppliers that I have talked to, even if they're early in the journey, they're like, give me feedback. Like, what else would you have liked to see? Like, I'm really curious, or what is your company doing, and what are we missing, and how should we look at this? So again, I think we're all learning together, but there's a real curiosity around what's happening in the space.
To me, it sort of feels like, and you said what the UN is doing, and just having those sort of online communities, right, where I can go to like a hub, and what sort of new and what policies can I look at, and what can I be inspired by? What can I use? What letters, etc. It really feels like that. To me, feels like what we need, isn't it? You just basically to go to one zone where you can go, okay, I don't need to do a Google search and go through 50 different type of websites to try and piece it together. It'd be sort of good, for everybody who's contributing. So say your Twilio research, we've done this research, we're going to share this at that particular environment. Because I feel like this is an open source conversation. This is not this is my IP conversation, right?
Correct. Yes. And I feel like people are very, very willing to share. And again, because the impact, we're talking about the environment and the community we live in and the people we interact with, and the impact can be huge. So why would we not want to share that information? Yeah. The other thing that, Jamie, some of your comments made me think of is that one of the other things that worldwide ERC is working on is creating some standards, because right now there are so many different suppliers that can help you do like a ESG assessment, like how do you stand out today? And then, if we're all asking for reporting, but there's not a reporting standard, companies are going to start to create their own standards. And so there was an ask to say like, hey, to minimize the cost of the suppliers to have, their whatever 50, 200, whatever corporate clients asking for information in different ways, could we as an industry come forward with some thoughts about like, here's what you should expect from your household goods supplier, RMC supplier, et cetera. So I know they're working on that right now. And I was like, that'd be brilliant, because we're all early enough in the space that, I may want a little, like a little cherry on top. I may want like a slightly different variation, but if in general we can align on something, that would make it a lot easier for our suppliers to all have the same metrics and share the same type of information with us. So I know that's, it's in the works. I
sort of feel like we should have the Stevie Wonder "We Are the World" song, playing over the top of this, because it's really inspiring, isn't it? Mm.
It is, and that's why I said I am a personal champion for it, because why I just so enjoy our CEO and some of the things that he said and where I work, because it truly it's meaningful. Like, even though that's not really what we do, it is really what we do, because and it's a part of all of our jobs.
And I think too, also, that it's something that candidates are seeking and looking to see that reflected in the organisations that they're interested in. Do you have any examples, or have you seen specific approaches that talent are taking in relation to recruitment or even retaining employees around this space? Like, for instance, incorporating it into the EVP, or I guess capturing it on your internet. What are you seeing from Twilio's side?
No, I think that's great. And that's where I think a lot of companies are being a lot more vocal about what they're doing in this space. Just like we have an annual report, there's companies that engage more with social media, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, right? Sharing their story, sharing, what their current state is, what goals they've set, what they've achieved. And so I think there is a lot more information. But Karen, like specifically to your question, that's part of the TA, like the talent partner recruiters toolkit, is they've got this amazing information about, I know I got it before I joined, like this amazing information about like, what are our values? What are some of the things we do? We have a huge Twilio.org that just gives back amazing amounts of money to our communities all across the world for different activities. And so I was like, wow, that's really Jamie, you're really kind of like, wow, that's really inspiring. Like, this is a company I'd really like to work for. So I do think, and again, maybe to the earlier question, like smaller companies, like maybe you can incorporate, even if it's not a lot, just some of the things that you're doing in this space and some of your sales pitch or your marketing materials or the talking points that recruiters have. We have it built into things that get sent out, right? That kind of talk about who we are overall. And it's maybe a little bit formalized, but I definitely think that it is a differentiator, and in a talent market that we're in today. I think that for me, it would come into play. And I really think for a lot of folks, it would as well.
It sort of feels like a bit of soul food, right? Like you said, it makes my heart happy. And I sort of feel like this resonates, like looking after the environment and giving back and not wasting and all those sort of things. We all know is right. You know what I mean? We know that pumping chemicals into a river is not right. And we know that, wasting stuff is not right. And I think that inherently we have known that for a long time. So it sort of feels like, the Great Awakening in a way, right? Like that people just go, yep, this feels normal. My other thought is, would you put this, I'm thinking it'd probably sit better on the careers page as opposed to the marketing stuff, because the marketing stuff sort of feels like, hey, we're doing this stuff, we're using it to promote it. But I think that if you've got on the careers page, then obviously, you're connecting with the people, and then the people outwardly who work for you will just emanate, this sort of stuff, and they'll start to do in their day-to-day actions. I'm always a big believer you get the internal right, that the external will look after itself.
Correct. Yeah, no, I agree. It should definitely be in both places. And I would say it's in both places for us today, but yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I think Tanya, I think the work that you're doing, obviously within Twilio, and then outside of Twilio with Move for Hunger and the various organisations you're involved with, including ERC and the other industry groups, of course, is making a huge impact. And you're, of course, a major role model in the mobility space in the US and globally. So on behalf of mobility practitioners, thank you for driving that selfishly, but also...
and immigration professionals, I'll just jump in there.
Exactly. You're part of the mobility group, Jamie.
Correct.
But yeah, no, I think we'd love to have you back on to see how your goals, either internally or externally, are progressing in the future. So yeah, keep us posted on how you're going. And of course, yes, for Move for Hunger, keep us posted with any regional rollouts in APAC. We'd love to support.
Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share on this topic. As Jamie has pointed out, like, it's near and dear to my heart. Yes, we should all hold hands and sing We Are the World, but it's just, I think for me, even like you think about, and I'm not that old, but like, what's my legacy? And I really do want to have made an impact, and not just like for myself personally, but for the larger communities that we operate in. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I would love to come back. Like, as many know, I've been in role for a few months, but not even, I haven't hit not a year yet. And I'd be glad to share some of the ability that we have to include more of this in our program going forward. So I'll look forward
to that point, Tanya. How does our audience follow you? How do we find out what you're doing? Because I'm engaged, I'm interested, and I'm like, this is great. I don't want to wait a year, right? Like, I feel like a year would be like light years ahead of where we are today. I'm like, I've missed so much.
I know. I want to hear about what happens to these icons.
Yeah, no, well, okay. So anybody's welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to share. And I do post updates from time to time, but we'll have to think about that. Maybe there's a way. I know ERC posts some regular updates on some of the things they're doing. And there are maybe some different community platforms, because again, I am pretty engaged in different regional councils and different industry events. And this has been a topic that folks have been really interested in. So I think I'm going to take that as a takeaway. We need to make sure that
could be like a featured post on your LinkedIn, right? That sits at the top there, how people interact with this stuff, because I think it's, it's definitely the way of the future. I think, it's just been a really inspiring conversation. And I'm happy that you've got to take out from this as well, because, this is what it's about, right? It's information exchange and growth. And, to Karen's point, I just think that you're doing such a great service for the mobility industry. And, we look forward to following your journey and getting you back on and hearing about, the next levels.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing this to the audience as well, for the work you well. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for your time.
Lovely to talk to you. Bye.
You too.